You could, that'd be great.
Call this meeting to order, our Operations Committee meeting, March 6th. First thing is to approve the minutes from the last meeting, and just for Lori's sake, since you weren't here and you're stepping in as an alternate, the minutes is very abbreviated. It's basically a discussion of what topics we wanted to cover in subsequent meetings, so the topics we're going to cover tonight, and then maybe some more that we'll cover in agenda setting later. So that's pretty much all there is to it, but I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Now, we got a big topic of safety and security, and covers a whole lot of areas and a whole lot of stuff. And as you know, the board members, and Steve is probably aware, we've got a lot of emails from parents, and some are in the audience, and lots of things floating around. Basically, I think everybody wants to get to a better place, and we want to figure out what that better place is and how to get from here to there. A lot of the suggestions involve creating a committee of some sort with a lot of different people from all different aspects to get into it, and I think that's probably where we want to get to the end of the conversation of what we want in a committee, what we would want from them, who we would want in it, and what we're really expecting to get out of it. But to get to that, I kind of wanted to start with where we are at now, because as I've read through some of our emails, some of them are just concerned, what are we doing and what's going on, and other ones have thrown stuff out that I don't think are quite true as to what's going on. And so I think it's good to get some clarity there. And I know, Steve, you had sent some information in emails and responded. I think Phil had some questions and there were some answers in there, but I think this is a good opportunity to get some of that out. And so I'd like to start with just kind of the facilities themselves, where they're all at as far as, single point of a secured entrance and that kind of stuff, and locks on doors and things like that. So
Certainly.
So start in that realm. Steve wants to jump into that.
Sure. So I know one of the questions was the facilities and the single secured entrances for them. And at this point in time, all the projects have been completed with the exception of West High School. We had to do some pretty substantial electrical work at West in order to get that up to speed. That's almost done, and then that will allow us to begin the process of creating that single secured entrance at West that will be key fobbed and cameraed and like our other entrances.
And if I could, sorry
Yeah.
for just jumping in. I'm assuming that is going to be that front entrance at West is going to be the single entry?
Yes.
Okay, so students at the back lot will walk around and go in there?
So maybe I'll use Lucas as an example. So we have, or Twain, we've got multiple buildings that, for one reason or another, need another entrance besides the front entrance. At Lucas, it's the BASP program. At Twain, we had a portable out back for quite some time there. We had the sixplex out there. And so we've got the ability to put those doorbell systems with the cameras in them at any entrance. So some buildings have them at multiple entrances, which then allows the person sitting at the central office the opportunity to receive that chime, see the person on the camera, have the interaction with them over the intercom. So will that be the only one that has that entrance set up? I don't know that yet. Part of that's a use process, and we've got to have some dialogue with the building staff to better understand if we need to have more than one entrance that has that kind of access. We've got some modulars out back at West right now, so the likelihood is that probably like Twain, they may have to have an additional entrance out there, and then they may have to have somebody that's out there keeping that door open during passing time so the kids can get in and out of the building. So once that's done, then all the buildings will have single secured entrance. At a lot of them, I think North Central Junior High, or I think the remodel at Lucas Elementary School, where we've been able to do that. We have what we call kind of that airlock process, where you come in and then you can't get into the main part of the building except during the beginning and the end of the school day. And then those doors are locked in front of you, and then you're routed through the office. Sign in there, and then once you're in there and you've been routed through the office, then you're out into the school. So we've been fairly successful at doing some remodels southeast. Some of them are more conducive than others to that kind of setup. Some were a little bit more of a challenge, but if you've been to Southeast, you now come in, and then once inside, you're in a fairly large foyer, but you still can't get into the school until you go into the office and check in there. So some of those buildings are a little bit easier than others to create that airlock system, and some of them would just have to be creative and work around that. Let's see, there was a question about cameras. You find those throughout the district. We have cameras inside and outside the buildings, and we're able to maintain video surveillance from those cameras. They have the capacity for you to zoom in and out when you go back and review the camera footage. So we just had an instance where we had a staff member that saw a suspicious person in the neighborhood, came in, alerted the principal. Principal was able to go back in, pull the video footage from that previous hour, pull it up, zoom in so that they could see the person and determine to the best extent they could whether that person was actually engaged in some of the behavior that was reported. So we've got those cameras in hallways, we've got them outside of buildings, they're on entrances, so that's fairly extensive. I know one of the questions that was asked was essentially, do we maintain that footage forever? We don't, because with that many cameras, it takes up quite a bit of digital storage. So there's an overwriting process for that. We've got that loop fairly long though, which allows us, especially as we're interacting with these kinds of incidents that get reported after the fact, for us to go back and look at that before something gets overwritten. If it is something that's a concern, we're actually able to pull it down off the server and then save it as it's being overwritten.
Would you say that there's enough cameras at all the various schools, or are they kind of all over the place from one to another?
Never enough.
Never enough.
But
Are there
there's
some
two
that
things
need it more than
happen.
others?
One is we're being warned, don't put too many in, because every student thinks they're going to be on YouTube. So you don't want to put them everywhere because they're going to do something silly. We are continually upgrading, whether it's, we just found out we can buy a less expensive camera now, so we can put more cameras in for the same price as what we were 2 years ago. We were just doing a bunch of those this past week. So we're always upgrading that, and we will add as the school calls, if Tate calls and says, you know, we're grabbing it, we would like a
We
camera
got a blind
here.
spot here, something like that.
We always will go back and add.
Well, and you know, cameras document, they, you know, it's hard for them to prevent.
Right.
But, and to that, we had a conversation at Northwest, and one of the parents said there, if it came down to a para in the hallway or a camera, they would prefer the para in the hallway. Because the para in the hallway could see a situation and act upon it, whereas a camera will just document a situation. It'll give you the ability to review it, but unless someone is sitting there watching it and can respond instantly or recognize that there's something going on there. That was expressed by some parents over there, and it really wasn't on the huger security thing, more on the bullying.
Yeah.
And just being able to have somebody that can see, okay, maybe somebody's giving the student a hard time, being able to step in and do that type of a thing.
And Phil raises a really good point. These are, it's not, we don't have a command center somewhere where there's someone sitting in there watching all these cameras throughout the district. That's not part of the process. We use these cameras, first of all, we let students know, we let staff know you're on camera most of the time when you're in the building. And so if something happens, clearly we're going to know what happened. We're able to go back and take a look at it. So it does serve as a deterrent from that standpoint. In terms of physical presence, you know, we work really hard to make sure staff are in the hallways during passing time so that they're essentially, think about how doors are spread throughout a building. You know, you go every 20 feet, you've got some staff member who's out there keeping an eye on things as kids are kind of handed off down the line. And then we also have people that are out in the hallways doing some of that monitoring work to make sure that as kids are passing through the halls and then in between classes that people are keeping an eye on that.
Is there ability to see that camera feed live?
Can they see it live?
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that
Like who?
the building principals can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm.
Certain people.
Yeah, it depends on who you're
Yeah,
talking
because,
about.
I mean, this has really come to the forefront since Florida, and they came out saying that they were looking at 15-minute delay on their camera feed.
Oh, no,
And they thought
no.
that somebody was in the building when he was long gone, and,
No.
you know, so
Yeah.
that's where the question's coming from, is if,
Nope.
And if
you know,
I
we
may
needed
say-
to be
Yeah.
seeing it live.
Over at Tate, the registrar she has 2 monitors. So she'll always be doing work on one, and she has the cameras up on the other one probably 90% of the time. And it's live feed. It's just,
Yeah.
so one more thing I guess I forgot to say, you know, when we add, we also have to work with IT, because they have to have space head in their switches.
Yep.
And the server has to allow, we can't just go add, and every time we add, we lose server space, so there's more to it than just going and throwing one out.
And this is getting in the weeds, but I mean, so is the footage being stored at a central location, or is it still in the building?
It's still the building.
It's in the building, so each building has their own storage and their own materials and that? Okay. And, okay.
I was just gonna say, going back real quick, when you talk about, you know, West being the last one to get in the remodel, you know, it was brought up that there's all these doors and they're just all unlocked all the time, and I just wanted to clarify, I don't think all the doors are unlocked all the time, is it?
No, they're not all unlocked all the time. You know, part of the challenge that we have, I mentioned, you know, you go out back at West and we've got portables out there. And so, at least at this point in time, till we get that wiring and that security piece done, in order to facilitate kids moving back and forth into the modulars, we've got doors back there that are unlocked during the school day that allow kids that opportunity to pass in and out.
Do you have a ballpark on the number of doors that are unlocked at West?
I couldn't tell you. There's 42 doors out there that I know of, off the top of my head. so.
And how many, what?
42
45.
total.
Okay, because some, I
45 doors.
thought, I got an email somewhere where they said there was 57 doors.
I've seen a few different numbers.
You're right, exactly.
But if it's like half a
And-
dozen.
And I was trying to piece, yeah, I know there's a lot, but
I'm just going off my head, I think the west door that the teachers come in is door 42, and then
Okay.
we start at the main door, so then you go like 3 more doors, so.
Sure, okay, right. Well, I know, and going to visit Brian Martz on that industrial arts wing, every time I go there, the door's locked.
Yeah.
And I got to pound on and get a student to open it. Don't know how.
They're not supposed to do that.
And they normally don't, it's Brian that gives them the authority to do that. On the temporary, if you could just go a little bit, we've gotten some questions on the temporaries. And I know the bond discussion was to eliminate temporaries, and that's in the plan.
We're working on it.
Working on it. But with the RAM model and what we have at some certain schools, temporaries are going to
Yep.
be a thing. Can you talk to the concerns that some
Sure.
parents have with temporaries, and, you know, with the long term that they're going to be there, what are we doing to
So,
work on
yeah,
that?
from a safety and security standpoint, I'll go back to Lucas, which is a great example. So we had the 10-plex and the 6-plex out back. We set it up with camera, microphone, fob access back there. And so students that were moving in and out of the 6 and the 10-plex either had to have a teacher with them, or if they didn't have a teacher with them, they were buzzing in and out. It is not the most streamlined process to move kids in and out, because obviously they're coming out of a secured building, and that's not fobbed, so they have to have a key to get back in. So you're moving out, and then you're outside, and now you've got to buzz, and you've got to get buzzed in. It's time consuming. So the staff are, the good news is the 10-plex has a bathroom inside it. That's eliminated a lot of that need to move in and out, but they're still coming in and out for specials, for lunch. 6-plex does not have a bathroom in it, so kids are moving in and out when they need to use the restroom. The teachers try to keep track of that as they go through their day and allow time for that as they're moving in and out of the building, but it's obviously not ideal in terms of not having kids under the same roof.
Okay, all right.
I guess the answer is until we don't have modulars, we're going to have kids moving in and out of buildings.
It's not ideal, agreed.
Yeah.
And,
It is difficult to get into them, though. I mean, when we had
Oh, yeah.
at Corval Central, I mean, you can't just walk up and get in.
You can't get into the modulars, but then, like I said, when you're out of the modular, you can't get back in there, but you can't get back in school too. You got to buzz in.
Well, it's easier to get into school because you can buzz
Right.
and somebody's sitting there, but the modulars, nobody's
They need to know you're out so that they let you
So-
back
It's
in.
very
And even
difficult
at
to
the
get.
elementary level, like at an Alexander where we have a temporary, those are secured and locked.
Yeah, you're buzzing in and out.
You're buzzing in and out
Yeah.
on all of them.
Which is, that's one of the issues that we've struggled with in terms of what classes do we place out in modulars. And so where we can, if we can avoid having classrooms out there, so if we have specials or our ELP program or something like that, that more frequently might have a teacher escorting kids in and out, that's sometimes a little bit easier logistically. Some buildings just aren't set up for that, and so we've got regular classrooms out there, and that's a little bit more students moving back and forth between the building and the modular, which adds to that complication with it. It helps, like you said, to get into the building because you got buzzer access, but we need to know that you're coming back out into the modular so that somebody's keeping an eye on and keeping the door open for you.
And so on the temporaries, it's a teacher that actually buzzes somebody into the building, into their temporary?
Well, into the temporary, you have to open the door.
Yep.
It just depends.
Okay.
I mean, it could be a parent.
could be another student, it could be a
teacher,
para.
It could be, unfortunately, a student.
Mhm.
I mean, there's nobody there, sitting there.
Right.
So, and teachers aren't gonna, go and answer the door every time somebody knocks.
Right.
It's actually quite difficult to get in.
And that's why they try to structure their day so where possible, they're making sure kids are getting extra restroom breaks during their specials and things like that, so they don't have to move them in and out as often, but you can't avoid that.
So I think we'll kind of circle back to that when we start looking at kind of process stuff, right? Because obviously, yes, not ideal as a facility, so what can we do while we're dealing with an ideal situation there? What can we do process-wise? So we'll come back to that. One of the things that I've seen in a couple different emails is that nobody can lock the doors in the classrooms, or if they can, they have to go outside in the hallway to lock it, and all this other stuff. So I wanted some clarity on, do our classroom doors have locks on them, and can they lock them from the inside?
Yeah, I'll let Jeff talk a little bit more about this, but every classroom in the district has an anti-intruder lock set. Part of our process with our safety plan is that our staff practice locking and unlocking those doors so they're comfortable with the mechanisms that go along with that.
And like, where works, I guess most concerned about subs, so when a sub is given their key, that key, everybody's key can lock any door from the inside. They can't unlock the door from outside, but once you're inside the room, it doesn't matter what key you have. If you have to lock it, you can lock any door in that building. So, but every classroom, locker rooms, everybody has this option now.
And that's elementary through high
That's
school,
every
single
classroom in the district, and offices, I guess I don't want to say classroom, but it'd be offices, guidance counselors, they're capable of doing it too.
And
And
it's
what
not,
is the actual mechanism? Is it a badge, or what is it? that
What,
they're
to
using?
lock it's a key.
It's a physical key.
It's a,
So you're giving them a key?
yes, every teacher has a key to their classroom.
Subs get one when they come in.
Yes.
They check it out, front desk.
Do you have to use the key to lock it?
Yes, yes you do. Otherwise, you could have on the way out, like if the teacher's out first, somebody, just like kids in your own house, go to the bathroom door, they'll lock the bathroom door and walk out and it's locked.
Yeah, although, you don't have the key on you,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're panicked, where's the key, where's the key? Something I think deserves more
I think you
discussion.
find-
I'd be interested to know what they're
I think
doing
you
in
find
other
most
places.
staff, their key is connected to their ID. A lot of them, so they've got it right there with them.
Something to think about would be to just make that standard, that is what teachers need to do, like have some sort of key holder even on their badge or something, so it just has to be there. Because I do worry I can imagine being in a panic and, where's my key, where's my key? Do we know what they do at other schools?
I do know, Dwayne just sent a thing out today about, this is what's the new trend, is doing exactly what we did. I mean, this is
Locking
what.
with a key?
Mhm. The same system we have, it's a Yale system. I believe it, well, it's Yale or Schlage, we have both in the district.
Are there any kind of mechanisms that can be installed that a kid can't turn on the way out the door and lock? I mean, something that's kid-proof, but not teacher-proof?
Well, the kids can't lock these. You have to-
Right,
That they
if it's a
can, but-
physical key, yeah, and unless the kid has
No,
the key.
no, that's not, I'm not saying, is there something else other than the key that could be installed that,
Well, if the door opens in, a wedge, and if the door opens out and it's got the control, there's I think a teacher in Iowa that came up with a little clamp that goes over the automatic closure that can
Mhm.
prevent a door
I've
from
seen
being
those.
opened.
Yeah, in our new schools, we don't have door closers.
Okay.
They're sprinkled. So if you have a sprinkled building, you don't have the automatic
Oh,
closure
okay.
on your doors.
Gotcha.
So older schools, yes, you're right. But basically, you're just grabbing onto that arm there.
and I didn't look at that, but I mean, how about just the things that they have in a hotel room that just, you know, you can latch it just to hold it shut for the moment while you go get your key or whatever. I don't know.
Well,
I don't know what the
then you have
standard
a
is.
kid that is in the room that could do that, and, no, yeah, if you, anything that you have that doesn't require that, discriminating key, can be done by anyone, even an intruder.
I'm sure somebody
Could-
somewhere has come up with something though. I mean, there's got to be some other option other than an old-fashioned key. I can't imagine there isn't.
Well,
So-
yeah, but if it's the type of a thing that anybody can do it, anybody can do it. And the key that you give to the teacher or the sub going into the room, you have some control over that's the only one. Otherwise, you would have kids that, if there's an open classroom, they go in, they close the door, they lock it, and,
Actually, a deadbolt, you can't close the door if the deadbolt's turned. So a kid couldn't lock the door from
Yeah.
walking out the door with the
You have to be
deadbolt.
really careful with fire codes. Some things are permissible, some things aren't, as you well know. We can look at any kind of options. It's just a matter of what it is and whether they're legal. This was decided upon several years ago. We spent a considerable amount of money and time. It's actually a very current type of technology that's being implemented across the country. It gives the flexibility for that instructor not to have to go out into the hall where they might be exposed to lock the room. They can lock the room from inside and protect the occupants of that room through that door. Now, you know, as you know, security is the whole onion approach. It's layer upon layer upon layer. It's not just one thing. Is that door specifically going to stop whatever is out there? No, but a combination of things make it harder and harder and harder,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
So that's just one component. Further discussion probably needs to be held in that area. From what I see in working with our physical plant is, I think our biggest challenge that we have in this whole area is uniform application
Yeah.
of the security measures we have in place. A lot of different buildings manage a lot of different ways because of the uniquenesses of the individuals that are there or the situations that they have to deal with. And so as a board, you're really going to be challenged to deal with the uniform application of how all of this stuff is implemented. How do these people get trained? How do they actually use the locks? How do they use the cameras? How do they use the back door being propped open or not being propped open? You know, all of those things are get down to the nitty-gritty of application. And you know, we can have all of these systems in place, which we do have a lot of them in place, but if they're not uniformly applied or understood or used properly or all those kind of things, then they fail on their own merit, right? So,
That's absolutely true, and I think we're gonna get to some of that stuff because,
Right.
like, propping doors open and things like that is something we need to work on.
Right.
Well, I got one more comment on the keys on the locks, and then I'll move on. I agree with, if you can make something standard of what to do with that key, that'd be great. I would argue that you don't want it attached to your ID, because if you lose your ID, you've lost your key with it, and then somebody knows where to go with this random key.
You cannot get into the building with that key.
No,
Once
but
you're in the
I mean,
building, you're right.
Yeah, and I just think there should be a separate thing, but that's just, I think,
So-
something we've sort of been told with our IDs at work, that we actually have, they don't even say where we work, it's just our picture now. So you can't find my ID and do anything with it, but they actually open the doors, so it's kind of important.
Is it one key that works in all the doors in a building?
No.
So
Your room.
classroom specific. So if
Right.
a teacher is going between several rooms, she would have, or he would have to have
That's
several
correct.
keys.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something to think about, how to make sure they're going to have that key on them at all times.
All right. Last couple of things on facilities, and we'll kind of move on to process. So new design of schools and stuff is something to talk about. Are we, where does safety and security come in to that play when we're designing it? And just one thing I threw on there is the thing that I'm thinking of as I look at a lot of our newer schools, and kind of the new trend of building actually is a lot of glass, right? A lot of windows and a lot of sunlight getting in, which is great for the atmosphere and stuff, but is that a security concern or anything like that? And where does that come into play in the design process?
It's a balance. I mean, we know that having more natural light is certainly more conducive to a positive student and learning environment, so we know that. There's lots and lots of research that shares that. Obviously, the more glass you have, the more access there is to a facility. You're going to be able to get through glass. You probably can't get through concrete quite as easily. So it's a balance of how much glass you have and how much natural light do you want.
Is it massively more expensive to put in bulletproof glass in
Yes.
some of these spots?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
astronomically?
Well,
more?
it is, and when you get on the defense side, embassies used to have fences that, and the Green Beret Colonel explained this to me, was that you would have the fence as far as you could throw a hand grenade and not hit the wall. And so that's where they would start the fence. That was their perimeter. And now, with other threats, they're moving it further and further and further. And, you look at federal buildings and things like that, the defenses they put, they're looking at stopping vehicles. And, we are when you're trying to deter a determined evil, it's hard to continually put barriers.
Yeah, and I hear that. Specifically, the reason I ask is because at Sandy Hook, they had the buzz-in thing, they had all that, all their safety things in place. The guy got in because he shot out the window to get in. So I'm concerned about just those spots where, the entrances, where you enter where you go up to the school and there's glass everywhere. At many of our schools, there's just like great big piece of glass pieces. But, is it like 10 times more expensive just to put in that spot?
We can certainly do our research. I guess I don't have any idea what that would cost.
And are other schools in other places looking at that as well?
I haven't heard that.
You haven't heard that?
I would guess that it's going to be a very big number,
Well,
even
So-
for a small park.
And
But I
like
don't
Phil
know.
said, we can't do everything, but I'm just thinking of the things that haven't worked at places that had these security measures.
But you got to keep in mind, look at all the security measures they had in Florida. They had everything that we have and more, and that didn't prevent someone from getting in. And I think that goes back to Phil's comment about determined evil. There's things that we can do structurally to make sure that our facilities are as safe as we can reasonably make them. And then there's an expectation that we train our staff so that they are as reasonably prepared as we can expect them to be in the event of most emergencies that occur, whether it's fire, tornado, intruder, whatever it is. And then I think the next step, which is something that we've been talking about, is And what do we do to make sure that our students are as well prepared as possible to follow our teachers in those instances? And I think we have to follow that prudency type of thing. So what can we do that's reasonable with the facilities? What can we do that's reasonable with our staff? And then what do we do that's reasonable with our students so that we have a high level of confidence that in most situations, we're going to be able to react appropriately when the unforeseen happens. We'll never be able to protect against everything. We just simply can't do that.
Right. I would be interested to see in the buildings that we're presently in the middle of renovating or will be renovating, just when you get your plans from the architect or whoever it is that gives you the price quote, if it would be possible to just find out in the entranceway, not every window in the building, but just the entranceway, what would be the incremental cost to put bulletproof glass there? And then I understand there's the issue with standardization across the district, but if we're building a new building or we're changing something anyway, what would be the incremental cost in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with looking into that. I think we can start moving on into training and process, because I think the bottom line is if people can get in, they can get in. And I understand your very specific example, the guy got in because he did shoot through a window. So that's one way to do it, but obviously there's ways people can get in. And to Craig's point is whether they're sort of circumventing the process, or we're not doing the process correctly on our end, right? So that's cool. I'd like to kind of move into the training part. Because again, we got a lot of emails of people saying, you know, we're not training appropriately, which may or may not be the case. I know there's a big concern on substitutes and how they get training. Just for my own benefit, what is there's a difference, I believe, between ALICE training and like a live shooter, intruder
VIST.
type training, right?
ALICE and VIST. So it's,
what are the real
ALICE
differences
training
there?
is the alert, lockdown, inform, counter, evacuate. VIST is the violent intruder training that we go through. So those are the two differences, the two that we work through. So ALICE training, right now this is used to be a 16-hour training. The local law enforcement has condensed it down to 2 hours for us. All new staff go through that in August every year. We do another training at some point later on in the year, and that's to make sure that we catch staff that have been hired after that August training cycle. We make sure that any staff that have missed it have the opportunity to participate in that later in the year one. We do trainings for specific groups, food service, physical plant, ESC staff. We most recently did one October 6, 2018 during the Teacher PD Day, because we had some teachers that were interested in having another opportunity to go through that. VIST, again, a little bit different. That's our violent intruder drills. Those are 2-hour trainings also. They're facilitated directly by our police department. They take place annually. Last year, August of 17, we did all secondary schools. That includes Trek Tape Transition Services. They also, the secondaries did it in 13 and 15, so we're doing them every other year. Our elementaries are in the even numbered years, so the next one for them will be 2018, August of 2018. And they did theirs in 14 and 16. And we rotate the large scale ones through our secondary and elementaries annually, so we're doing one every year, one level. On the alternate years, when they're not doing the VIST training, the principals go through a PD module, which includes a video review of the ALICE procedures with their staff, and they do that we require they do that within the first month of school.
And the VIST is required?
Yes.
It's not voluntary?
Well, we do allow people to opt out. I'll give you an example. We almost always have every building has someone in it who's pregnant. And we want to make sure from a health standpoint that we're cognizant of that. We've got other people that have come to us that have other post-traumatic stress issues, and participating in that violent intruder training is very traumatic for them. And so we work with them individually to determine whether it's appropriate for them to go through it.
And that's what is being offered now at the high schools, right, with the secondary students?
No, this is with staff. We do
But
that. ALICE.
is it the same kind of thing that What are we
We don't
doing
do-
on the
we don't do
Saturday
violent-
with the?
Oh, so we're working with law enforcement right now to figure that out. We've had 2 or 3 meetings with them just in the last week. We actually had one today where we're trying to figure out what will work and what won't work, both in terms of their expectations on working with students and parents. Keep in mind, you've gone through ALICE training, so you've gone through a 2-hour instruction before you go through violent intruder training. So there's they talked about this at length today, there's some apprehension about doing any kind of intruder training without people having gone through the ALICE training first. So the conversation today with law enforcement was they'd prefer to do some kind of ALICE training before they do anything with any kind of intruder training with students and parents. So we're still working with them to make sure that we're deferring to them. This is their area of expertise. We want them to tell us what it is that we ought to be thinking about as we move into working with a larger group of people other than our staff.
Kind of answered like 3 of those questions. I know came up at the last board meeting, I think you brought it up about the board.
Yes.
Previous boards have done ALICE training, I think specifically.
Actually done violent intruder training.
Violent intruder
Yeah.
training.
Yeah.
So obviously we can talk about it now. I'm not going to
I would
volunteer all
recommend
7
you-
of us to do it, but
I recommend you put it in your
Seems like
rotation.
something we
My
should
2
do.
cents.
Well, and I think whatever we come up with to present to the students, I think definitely we should get a chance to, go through that and get an idea of what's going to be offered.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you think about. One is you could think about going through the 2-hour ALICE training that all of our staff go through, and then we could follow that with a violent intruder drill. The last time we did it here, we set it up like it's a board meeting. We use our ESC folks as the audience members, so we get a group of them to be in here and be present for that, and then the police run through it just like they set that up, and it's an eye-opener for you, I'll tell you that.
When's the next regularly scheduled ALICE training?
August?
August.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we were to do something
No.
sooner, it'd be something we
No.
have to set up special and that, okay.
They're very willing to do that, though.
Sure.
I talked to them about that, they said they'd
And
be happy.
when you do that, since we encompass 5 different law enforcement municipalities, who?
Great question.
Do they do it in rotation, or does somebody take the lead in that, or they all have a part of it?
City of Iowa City takes the lead in it. So back to, what are we working on for this spring? So we've been we had them all in here. I had a conversation with them since then. Today's follow-up was with Iowa City. Iowa City does most of the ALICE training. The VIST training, though, the violent intruder, includes all municipalities, plus the University of Iowa, Johnson County Sheriff. So we get all the municipalities, plus all other law enforcement agencies in Johnson County. So they work on that because if there was a violent intruder, they're going to respond as a multi-jurisdictional response team. And so they all come together when we go through that. The ALICE training in particular, though, the City of Iowa City's taken the lead on it. They just have a larger staff, and so it's been more conducive for them to do that. And so they will go out and work with in other jurisdictions to provide that ALICE training in those buildings because they've got the staff that are trained to do it. So actually, as we were talking to them today, and maybe Sean, back to your question earlier, we're not only looking at this spring, but then we're asking ourselves, okay, what's the long game on this? What are we playing next with when we get kids back in the fall? So our conversation with them has been about how do we provide some level of standardized training, ALICE training, and also fire and tornado. So we've got that whole emergency thing encompassed for our students in a way that provides them the opportunity to learn, but then also to have dialogue with staff. And so we're looking at putting together some video components that would allow us to break the ALICE training down. And then students would be able to watch the video component of it and then have a follow-up directly in the classroom with their teacher. So if you think about ALICE's 5 components to it, we walk through each of those separately with the students. There's their Q&A time with the teacher so that they can talk about if it's counter, what do we do? How do we go through that? Get some questions asked and answered by the kids. And then set that up so that we're working regularly with them throughout the year next year. So the City of Iowa City and Iowa City Public Television have said this is something that they can partner in with the other jurisdictions providing assistance in developing those video modules so that we're ready to roll those out for next fall. So the conversation today with them was they're very confident that they can have that ready to go for us for next year. course, we're thinking about it from an education standpoint, so how do we build a curriculum around it that allows the students the opportunity to learn, to process that, to get their questions asked and answered so that they can actually put it into play.
Well, we're kind of on that whole law enforcement entities and the multiple ones that we have. And I brought this up before. Have we, I want to make sure that in our discussions, in most of these tragedies, there were bits of information that were not shared with everyone. Everybody had a little piece of the puzzle. And when all the pieces are put together, it looks very obvious there were things that could have been, steps that could have been taken. And from a community standpoint, what steps do you see taking to make sure that we're not, that we're not missing opportunities to make sure that information that the Sheriff's Department may have, or Coralville may have, or North Liberty might have, and information we have that could be pertinent, that there's sharing of information, so opportunities for helping and care for troubled individuals can be provided.
Good news for us is that our municipalities are very cooperative, which is really nice. There's not, I don't sense that territorialism that would keep them from working together, so it's not uncommon, just last week, for us to have representatives from multiple jurisdictions together. Right now, we're having some dialogue, and all three chiefs and myself are on that, and so from North Liberty, Coralville, and Iowa City. So I think the communications channels are really robust from that standpoint. I think that they're doing a good job communicating laterally. They're doing a good job communicating with us, which allows us to share information with them and them to share information with us. I know that when we just had one, so I haven't sent the notice out to you yet, but I will shortly here. We just had a suspicious person on property type of situation, and I know that we're able to work directly with whichever municipal law enforcement agency is in that particular school district area, but then they will share that with the other law enforcement agencies so that they're aware that we're dealing with that issue here. Not that it would necessarily show up in one of the other municipalities, but they want to make sure that it's pretty clear what we're dealing with so that everybody else is aware of that, so that we don't wind up not knowing that something happened over here because we happen to be on the other side of the line over here type of thing. So that works really well. Johnson County is a good overarching from that standpoint, whether you're thinking about the Sheriff's Department per se, or whether we're thinking about state level affiliates that might work through the county like DHS and some of those others, so that there's, again, that transparency and that willingness to share information back and forth.
Well, Kevin Kenny says with the Joint Communications Center with 4 of them in there, and of course no one's going to say they don't cooperate with somebody else, but the U of I isn't in the Joint Communications; they're separate.
That's right.
And one of the things that gets that I want to make sure or am concerned about is that if you do have police activity at a house that seems to be problematic, is there any, is the information available to the police department to know if there are school-age students in that building, what schools they go to, and that do we get that information and can say, okay, we can identify that we have students or a family under stress, and to keep our eyes open for, like I say, additional care.
Yep, great question. So one of the things that works really well for us is that our 3 largest municipal law enforcement agencies have identified a point of contact for us. So we're not trying to find out from that shift captain or this detective what's going on there. When they have that kind of issue, that there are any minor students that are involved in something, they live at a house, they were involved in the activity, family or whatever, the activity was occurring at their house, then that feeds into their one point of contact, and then they reach out to us. When they reach out to us, it's often directly to building principals. Now, of course, not all of our kids go to school in the attendance area where they live, so they also have a contact here at the ESC, so that we're able to better understand who the child is, who the family is. If that's not the school of attendance because they're out of attendance area, we can make sure to make a connection to a different school so that we can collect that information and put that together. So that one point of contact makes an enormous difference for
And
us.
the three that are involved in that, is that,
North Liberty, Coralville, Iowa City.
okay,
Yeah.
so Johnson County and U of I are the two that are,
Yeah, in Johnson County, actually, it winds up being a pretty straightforward process because they really only service Hills for us. And while they work comprehensively with the rest of the district, and they have kids, obviously, that are attending lots of different areas, their primary point of contact, from direct contact, is with Hills Elementary School. So if something happens in the county, and it's not directed towards the Hills student population, they'll refer it to the other municipal law enforcement agency that's in that vicinity so that they can pass that on to us.
So one of the things that I'm most concerned about is that in many of these mass shootings, it's not been somebody that's attended the school. Columbine obviously was, but in many, and I'm speaking not just school shootings, but mass shootings in general, a lot of times it's a total stranger that lives in the community. So maybe attended the school earlier. In the Florida situation, the kid was expelled from the school. So the school was no longer involved with him. What happens at the community level when there's folks that are on the edge and people say, I'm nervous about this person? I mean, if I call in and say, I'm nervous about so-and-so, what happens?
I don't know.
Well, there's big picture questions that I think a lot of people are asking now, and I think we'd all like to get some answers to that. And I don't think us in this room are going to be able to do that. But I'd like to be able to think that we could at least address that in the smaller scale. And one of the things I have on here, and it was actually brought up, I think, by a student maybe, or somebody that spoke to us at the last board meeting, of not knowing what that process is if they do see something. And I understand we have a process for them, but how do students or parents or anybody else, how do they find out what they're supposed to do with that information if they do see something that seems off? Or
It's interesting. So we went through, you kind of do your gap analysis, right? So we've got two systems out there right now which have been working really well. And the one is the bullying one, and the bullying and harassment one, and the other is the sexual harassment issue, where it's very easy for you to text in, you can remain anonymous if you want to, but you can report it out to us. So one of our takeaways from that last meeting was neither one of those, I'll use your term, neither one of those kind of falls into the see something, say something idea. It's not bullying and harassment necessarily. It might not be sexual harassment. It's this other thing over here. So right after that meeting, actually, I've got Kristen working on that so that we will have a separate channel that is, for whatever reason, something doesn't make me feel safe. It might be Craig's propping the door open all the time at the school here. It might be, this kid is acting weird and I'm not sure who to tell about it. So we want to actually create that same easy to use social media based platform that allows you to, if you see something, say something, and so that we can get that right away so that we can act on that, because it doesn't fit in the two that we have right now. And so we need to create a third channel that will allow people to do that.
Well, I could see there being some sort of crossover with that, but in some
There's
cases
some
it's
things
very
that you might say,
isolated.
oh yeah, this student's bullying somebody else and I'm really worried about it going to the next level. But on the other hand, it might be, boy, I'm really concerned that this person seems suicidal and I'm not sure what to do about that. Or something else that's more of a mental health related issue. And we don't have a channel that allows for easy reporting of that. So we're in the process of building that right now, and that should be coming out pretty quickly.
in our climate survey, we've got a lot of work on the bullying to still work on, and that's the root of a lot of things. And in the survey, we have a lot of students that don't feel safe, and listening to, or going through that data, it wasn't really that they were fearing a Florida-type situation, more a harassing, bullying situation like that, which can escalate and that. So that's where and I don't know, I've formulated the right words for it yet, but we really got to work on that community to make sure that everyone is feeling welcomed and valued and appreciated. And if you can get the climate to where you have students that feel safe in there and welcomed and everything, I think we're on the right track.
Had a thought and I lost it, so I'm just going to move on. So some of the things that I think if we were going to have a committee, parents group, whatever we want to call it, we'd want to start looking at, sort of some of the bigger topics that have come up, and that's been like, SROs and things like that, metal detectors, stuff on a larger scale that is going to have a lot of heat, in conversation from both sides of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And I know officers and metal detectors have been brought up in the past, and I have my own recollection of how some of the conversations went. So if you have any perspective as to kind of what's gone in the past, so we can start moving forward. I don't want to just let's all have the same conversation we had 4 years ago, but at least to have some context of what has been discussed, so then we can have better conversations moving forward.
So I know it came up right when I came to the district back in 2010, and it's come up 2 or 3 times since then, those of you who have been participating in it. Usually it's gotten to the point where we've had conversations about it either at the board table, a committee meeting, might have come up through community comment, and essentially the final decision has been that it's not right for our community. I do know that all of our major law enforcement agency jurisdictions would support it if that's something that we want to do. They've been relatively vocal about that, but they also recognize, they're designed to serve the community that they represent, and if that's not what the community wants, then they find other ways to help us meet some of those expectations that we have of a school resource officer.
But I think that's one of the if we need to reinstitute a safety committee, in my view, and that's one of the charges that you could have with this committee.
Sure.
Where you would have all 5 of the law enforcement and municipalities representative, community members, teachers, staff, admin,
Sure.
and have a lengthy discussion, because it has been segmented when it's come in. It's been a discussion and kind of moved away. And I agree with your conclusion on it that the community as a whole probably wasn't supportive. But it's also, we haven't had that discussion in the environment we're in right now. So I think exploring that. I think also we need to look back at some past situations. The flip, and I know the flip folder was big for us when we first got on, and the incident that happened at West High, for the new board members to kind of know
Sure.
what has happened.
Yep.
That type of a thing. So I think that would be helpful too, and just a review of, this is things things have happened, and so a review of that. But yes, I think that a safety committee to look at all things that we've been discussing here today would be extremely beneficial.
When was the last time that discussion was had?
3 years ago?
Probably. I mean, I can look back and pull.
I think it was about 3 years
And
ago.
was it a large community discussion or just a board discussion?
It came up, and this is usually the way it comes up, either an incident happens, and you have a group that comes in to advocate for it. The West incident occurred, we had a group that came in and advocated for it at that point in time. And they've usually come either to the board to community comment, or they've come to a committee meeting and requested that this be something that we look into, that we consider. Board's gone through a discussion process on it. They usually get a lot of feedback, either in community comment or community forums or via email and phone, things like that, a lot of input. And like you said before, it tends to be kind of polarizing. You get people that come in here and here. And after listening to that input, then the decision has been made that we may make some changes to what we're doing right now, but we're going to keep what we're doing right now and not move in that direction.
So that was kind of, I mean, it wasn't a committee decision.
No.
It was a board decision.
Mhm.
So I think what we're talking about is giving some very specific charges to a committee that would, I think, actually, to narrow it down to certain topics would keep it focused.
Mhm.
And let the committee come to us with a recommendation.
Sure.
It would still be a board decision in the end.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. It always is, but
Much like the Bell Schedule Task Force, the
Exactly.
committee
Yeah.
recommended something and then the board took that into account. And
you turn the group loose to really work on the nuts and bolts on an issue and then come back with recommendations, and then the board makes the determination.
Before we go a little bit farther down that path, I know when I'm picking my son up from high school, generally there's an officer there. And I believe some of the other schools or officers are visiting or going there at certain times. Do we know, is that real ad hoc, or is that a very planned thing? Is there certain
For the most part, it's
schools
pretty
that-
ad hoc. So, for instance, North Liberty has a community-oriented policing grant, which allows them some additional funding, which helps pay for an officer. That officer, one of the things that he does is he's just, as he's out on his regular patrols, he tries to make sure that he's visible at the schools. So depending on when you're at any of the schools in North Liberty, you might see him going through those circular front entrances, driving his squad car through there, especially at secondary schools, and more so at Liberty because their students drive through the parking lot. You'll see them stop in at the building, talk to the folks in the front office. At Liberty, they had some student extracurricular activity going on at the end of the day, so he decided that it might be more appropriate to get out of the car and stand in the foyer, so he's been there on and off since some of that extracurricular activity was happening in the fall. Made a significant difference. In Iowa City, Henry Harper fills kind of a familiar or similar role. He's no, I can't remember what he's called. Is he,
I think it's a community liaison
yes,
officer.
community liaison officer. So
Is his title.
yep. So you'll see him at City High in the building, working on relationships with kids. You might usually, and especially with those two, if you see them there, it's more frequently right at the beginning of the day, right at the end of the day when kids are kind of milling about, going in and out of the building.
But this is more set up by the individuals or the different municipal law enforcement agencies, or
Yeah.
it's not a permanent person in
No,
the
it's
in the
not
building. or
systemic. Like you
anything.
said, it's ad hoc. Keep in mind that they have other responsibilities, so sometimes you may see a gulf where they're not present for weeks on end because they've got other responsibilities with the job to take them away. When they don't have those, they're a little bit more present, so it kind of ebbs and flows with their job.
And the district doesn't have a set policy on it. It's up to the building administrators that invite them in or.
We have great relationships with all of the municipal law enforcement agencies. They're welcome in our buildings. They're welcome on our property. We do know that there are issues that are out there. We just had a PTO meeting at one of our buildings, and there was some expressions of concern about children whose immigration status may be in question, whose parents and the kids may have some concern about uniformed law officers being present. We had a couple of parents that expressed concerns about kids having had adverse family interactions with law enforcement, and so we're really sensitive to that, and we want to make sure that we balance that We want kids to feel safe and secure, we don't want them to feel intimidated, and for us, that's a real balancing act that we go through.
Right, but in the situation with Henry Harper at Alexander, which that's another one that we should probably explore, and some of the new board members may not be familiar with that one. Part of having a uniformed officer in the building is to start that healing process and to make sure that everyone in the community recognizes that uniformed police officers are there to help us, not there to hurt us. And the reason they wear uniforms is so in a crisis they're easily identified. And it's important that you build those trusting relationships. And if it's starting with young students and doing that on a very, building block type of process, I think that's part of our educational charge to make sure that the community members that we put forth to be our community leaders in the future recognize that firemen, EMTs, and law enforcement have uniforms for a purpose, and that they're there to help us. But yeah, I think that would be another one that I think would be helpful to bring the new, for everyone just to review
Sure.
what transpired there and what we can learn from it.
So I think we can wrap up this topic. I know Lori's got other commitments tonight, and I want to make sure we get to our second topic.
Yes.
Tonight.
Yeah.
But I would want to wrap it up with at least talking about committee. How do we go about doing it? What do we want it to look like? What do we want them to kind of cover? I think that, there's a lot of people who have a lot of ideas, and we tap into a lot of different places, but I think it needs to be, a pretty well-rounded group that's going to come with a lot of different things from a lot of different sides. And I want it to be, a real thoughtful process and not real knee-jerk type reactions to what's going on. So I'd like to start that process by figuring out, making it, if we want to have a committee, building that thoughtfully too. I think that's a good start to making everything after that to be thoughtful. So I don't know what the best way to make that happen is. So
I'd recommend
we've got some parents here that have, definitely volunteered to join that, and I think we should have parents in it, and probably law enforcement people and people from the district. But
When I did the Bell Schedule Task Force, I basically just made a list of the participants, and then I tried to make sure that we had people from both sides of town, people from all races. We had a balance, elementary, secondary, not too heavy in one thing or another, one side of town versus the other. So I think administration in this case could do that for us, though I don't know that we need to build that ourselves.
But
is there somebody
that was a charge from the board, so that's one of the things I would
Well,
recommend.
that's what I was going to say. I'm going to report back
Yep.
at the next board meeting that we had this conversation, because I think the board needs to say,
Yep.
yes, we want to have a committee, or no, we don't. But I would like to just say, hey, guys, do you want a committee? I'd like to have a little more substance than that when we talk about it. So that's why I'd like to at least kind of have something here.
Because the thing is we're going to get 100 people that want, there's
Oh, yeah.
a lot of people
There's-
concerned about this right now, and we don't want it to be weighted
Mhm.
one direction or the other. We need to have a good conversation that looks at all sides to keep the conversation meaningful. So I think there would need to be some decisions, and there are going to have to be some cuts. Not everybody can be on it that wants to.
I think if you make a recommendation from the committee at the board table and the board says, yes, we would like to charge a committee to do that, like Lori chaired the Bell Schedule Task Force, you may want then a board member to chair that, but then from a support standpoint, we've got protocol like we use for the school improvement committee, for instance, where it kind of has one of these, one of those, one of these, one of those type of thing. We can use one of those processes to help select. We can put an open call out to say, hey, if you're interested, let us know, share your information with us, and then from that, try to go through and, like you said, get that representative.
Like our IPM committee
Yep.
had a broad spectrum and activists on both sides,
Mhm.
and was able to do some good work. So yeah, and I think too we have to look at a safety committee as an ongoing committee.
Mhm.
hopefully we get to a point where we're not dwelling on, the threats to students in the buildings. Just routine safety issues in schools are enough to, and compliance and those types of things to have it as an ongoing presence, but, yeah.
So you may want to think of two things. You may want to think about from the urgency issue, for lack of a better way to describe it, some type of board-led, let's take a look at the school resource officers, metal detectors, whatever types of things that are really top of mind right now. But then long-term, what does a safety advisory committee look like? And how do we put one of those together? And that's usually a different structure than the board-led, we need to address this issue right now type of thing. So it might be a two-pronged solution to
Right,
that.
well, or it morphs, the immediate concerns are immediate,
Yep.
and then as that, it morphs into something else.
Sure.
And that. Yeah, I would, say that we should bring it back to the board table to create a safety committee and look to charge it with looking at,
Yeah, so I'm going to just interject if you
Please.
don't mind. So just verbiage here. We have our committees that tend to be, like you said, ongoing, and then we have task forces that have a beginning and the end.
Mhm.
So in this case, I think I hear Phil saying he wants a committee, but
That's a long-term.
long-term,
Yep.
but we're
Well-
talking about the specific issue of
yeah.
School
of
safety.
school resource officers, which would be a task. So, and I think it's important to have an endpoint,
Sure.
a set endpoint, so that it doesn't
Yeah, well,
ever come
and
to fruition.
you're absolutely right, and I go along with that. And what I was saying, just as far as it morphing is that I would say that I agree with you that essentially it's a task, it starts as a task force with a task of looking at the issues we identify with a set time frame, and then reporting back to the board. And then as that goes forward, after that task is done, then we look at that parts of that
So you want to
nucleus.
continue on as part of the
Continue,
safety
as
committee.
right.
And there
So-
might be different participants with different
Yeah,
topics.
exactly.
I mean,
Well, we
I
can
think
start the
that-
planning for
yeah.
the safety committee now while the task force does its work so that it's ready to pick up and go when the
Sure.
task force is done.
Sure.
So just, I'm outnumbered 2-1 here, so if you two say you want to recommend to the full board on
Yes.
our next meeting to create a task force.
Create a task
that's-
force,
that's
and
what
I
will
will
do.
volunteer to chair it, or if the board decide on someone to chair it.
So I guess we'll bring that back to the board on Tuesday and see what happens. Just because you guys are here, is there anything you want to interject? I would let you guys speak real quick to,
I think
did
first
we
and
answer a
foremost,
lot of
thank you for
stuff?
having these conversations and bringing it up and reading the questions and answering the questions. I've been surprised to learn in the past week that Iowa is one state that the legislature doesn't require schools to do this. The Board of Education recommends that you have a plan in place, but that could be as something as small as just a folder that's in your classroom with a plan. So living in Iowa my whole life, teaching in Iowa, being a parent of kids now in the Iowa City School District. My mom's a teacher back in, I won't say the school district, but in the Des Moines area. She always is so, Iowa City has a reputation of being progressive, and we still have Valentine's parties, we still have Halloween parties, and that's not necessarily something that happens around the state. So I'm, as a parent, as a teacher, I'm very thankful to be here and hope that we can do these things and have them in place so the safeguards are up. And nothing's foolproof, but I think that the fact that you're having these conversations and the questions that you're asking each other, it's a great starting point. And I'll keep coming to meetings and listening and supporting it, and so thank you, I guess is the biggest thing.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased to hear about the task force and the committee, because I do think it's two separate issues with an urgency and an ongoing, because it will continuously forever change. just one point, I don't know about the locks, like, you might need a kid to be able to lock it. You might need to look at that in an emergency. I've heard that feedback from teachers in the district, like that's an honest concern for them, that it might need to be locked.
That kid's sitting right there to reach.
That's just something I heard that I wrote down, and getting the committee up and going, I think, is going to be the best step forward, and I think that's what parents, from feedback from parents, and we're both former teachers at the elementary level, we would also like to see that, and we talked to a lot of teachers over the last week during conference time and stuff like that, and they brought up concerns even in our brand new buildings where log is not as safe as we were led to believe it was. So we're more alarmed than we were, but this has made me feel better tonight, so thank you for letting us be here and talk.
Glad you guys could come, and we'll definitely bring it back to the board on, it's not next to, it's a few weeks now. We get the spring break off, so 3 weeks off.
One last thing before we get off of it, it's just a quick question of when, and the legislative comment made me think of it. I was speaking with a teacher that was saying Iowa is one of the 15 states that allows armed teachers in the schools. Is that correct, Steve?
It is.
Okay. But we have no type of anything like that?
We do not.
Okay.
Should we move on to the
Yes.
topic? We good?
Sorry.
All right. Playgrounds, just a tiny little topic to cover in 20 minutes. I'm gonna make Craig cringe. Let's say that our end game is that every playground in our district is all-inclusive. Surfacing, equipment, and all that. Let's say that's the end game, and it's God knows how many years out, because it's not tomorrow. But it's a long way out. That's where we want to get to. So we're going to have to take tiny little steps to get there. Right? I'd love to take giant steps, but we don't have unlimited funds. And so I know that we have looked at some numbers as costing for playground services, and I'd like to at least kind of touch on that again to a certain degree, because I don't have it readily available to me. But and then kind of talk about how we're doing the life cycle for playgrounds, and just figure out what are some steps we can take, little steps that aren't going to really kill us financially, but are still taking steps towards that really far out end game. So again, I guess I would take it from, kind of where we're at now, what kind of schedule do we have for working on playgrounds and surfaces and things like that, and just kind of see where we're at to start with again. Who wants to?
You want to take that one, or you want me to?
Do you want me to start? You want to do the whole thing?
So we're working on a lot of fronts right now. As you remember, we are actually working on a DOJ under a DOJ response right now. They've not communicated with us here recently, but they said that in talking with Kingsley that we may have some type of feedback from them in May as far as when they came out and did their site review and those kind of things. And so that's still pending, and we're cognizant of having that piece out there. The representatives of the DOJ, however, did share with us that we should continue with what we were doing in the meantime, absent any different direction from them. And so that's something that we're continuing to do. And one of the things that Kingsley just informed me of here this last week is that he has taken steps to put some structure around assembling a task force, a committee. I'm not sure what we want to call it. I think it's a task force, according to Lori's definition. It has a beginning and an end. He wants to meet 4 or 5 times. Dates and things aren't quite specified yet, though I think he's narrowing in on some specific dates. Wants
Real
to
quick,
have.
is this about playground
Yep.
services, all of
Yep,
it?
all of it. It's all-inclusive discussion, having community representation, student representation, staff representation, that on this committee. And so I believe that he is doing exactly what you want done right now. He wants to have that conversation centered around our policy and what that policy looks like moving forward, okay? In the meantime, for this summer, yes, we are proceeding with renovations to playgrounds. For instance, we have to work at Longfellow because of its renovation schedule. They need a playground to open school this fall, and so we need to make sure that what we're dealing with at Longfellow is all of course, involving the stakeholders in that conversation, as we always do, as far as what needs to be put back there, and ADA compliant, the whole business that we always work through. There's also other pieces of our life cycle that we're needing to get started on in order for us to get them done in the summer. And Ben has been, I've been working with Jeff and Ben on those pieces as well as we look ahead towards the summer, and they can fill you in on all the details centered around those if you desire. But in a broad, big picture perspective, from a policy level perspective on how we're going to approach our life cycle and future playgrounds, that's kind of the context under which we're working right now.
And is the playground stuff, is it solely paid through PEPL, or is it different?
We actually have a great partnership with our parents, and we let them, one of the reasons why we put the life cycle together was to give our PTOs a heads up as to when their piece of play equipment is scheduled to have a renovation or a replacement done. And so they can be in the process of setting aside some funds if they so desire to do that, to supplement and augment that play equipment and that play structure, along with what the district has standardized as our contribution to the process.
What are the limitations or stipulations around the augmenting process? Because I know going to DPO meetings, you hear a lot of people across the district say, well, they told us we couldn't do anything, or we could only do this standalone thing.
Right.
So I was just kind of curious, what are the rules?
Well, in order for us to maintain a certain amount of equity from the district's perspective, and I know that you know that there's a great disparity of wealth generating capability between our buildings. You could have one building that could set aside $40,000, $50,000 to add to another scoop of ice cream on top of what we have there, and then you have another building that they'd be hard pressed to come up with $3,000 to add to that. And those are real life examples, by the way. And so what we say and what our current policy is that we have a standard amount of money set aside. It's roughly about $100,000 to $120,000 right now that the district sets aside for a replacement structure. And we work with the stakeholders in that replacement structure, and we make it as inclusive as the stakeholders and everyone wants to make it in that environment. We work with the building principal, we work with the parent group, and those, and even have student input and representation when it's appropriate and practical. I know one of our principals put together a survey where he surveyed all the students on the type of equipment that they wanted to see in their playground and things like that. And so it can be a lot of fun. It's a fun activity for that collaborative piece, okay? But then Ben and Jeff take all that, they assimilate it down, we get the proper bids, we come up with some designs that are compliant, ADA compliant, fit the site, all those things have to be in place. And then the district has said that we'll be responsible for the surfacing material. We're using that, of course, the wood engineered fiber surfacing right now is what our standard has been. And we've gone to things such as zero entry for wheelchair accessibility and things like that. We understand the limitations that surround that. I mean, our Shimmick example has proven to us that it's not a foolproof process, right? Compaction on a daily basis is important for wheelchair access and how it gets scooped out and all those kind of things. And so the board asked us to look at what it would cost to do rubber surfacing. That report was given back to the entire board here a few months ago by Dwayne. He took a look at that and made those estimates. But as far as the parent participation portion in their funding, we say that they can add to a standalone pieces of equipment as they have funds available. We don't like them to build onto what the district's standard portion is, because that's where you get into the equitability piece. But if they want to supplement with standalone pieces or other pieces of equipment, we certainly encourage that as site limitations or site availability is appropriate for those types of pieces of equipment.
Are there any limits to that?
Are there any limits?
Dollar limits?
Just site limitations.
Okay, so if
we don't-
you put a $100,000, $120,000 district structure.
Right.
And you've got a DPO that has the fundraising capability to raise $200,000, they could they put, no site limitations were there, could they put twice, 2/3 more this playground?
Technically, I assume that would be correct. We've not put in our current policy any limitations on that. It's just site-specific. We have a balance of green space and play equipment. Many of our sites are limited in that regard. You have areas that are forested and not forested, the natural gardens, they all have to coexist properly. And so we depend on Ben and his crew to really give us some pretty good guidance in that area, whether the structures are going to be okay where they're being planned or what the plans are, and we have to approve all of those. The PTOs can't just come onto our property and build something because they want to. Right. It has to go through that approval process. And so we kind of act as the gatekeepers in that, but we've not put a dollar limit on that.
And so the parent supplement is kind of targeted towards equipment pieces, right? As opposed to looking at surface.
We wanted the parents to have fun with their money. They have a hard time raising money. They give money. I mean, when you do the donations, and surfacing isn't a very sexy topic. It's really not. And working with equipment is a little bit more fun for the parents. So we made that decision that they could invest their money in the equipment, and we would take the responsibility for the surfacing. But if we really need to go in a different direction with like rubber surfacing and so forth, because of the cost, we're really going to have to rethink our life cycle. We're either going to have to dedicate a whole lot more money towards it, find a different funding source, partner with other folks, or we're going to have to cut back on what we do each year, or we're going to have to maintain our current surfacing material. So, you know, all of those are possibilities.
Everything's a trade-off.
Right, yeah, and I would say I would say almost all of the above.
Yes.
but not all of them.
Yes.
And I think we have to look at what Clerk Ecomana was able to do, going by what was at least published in the paper. their figures don't jive with Dwayne's figures on cost and everything that way. And I think that we've got a community we have a very generous community, we live in a generous community. And I think we need to tap into that, and if it's a type of a thing that we can fundraise and get some for equitable play surfaces and do it on a rotational. I mean, a playground is a 20-year investment, correct? I mean,
Roughly.
That's what we're looking at. If we go to the community and we say, look, I mean, we put whiteboards and technology in the classroom by going out to them, and the foundation did that. It may be the type of a thing we've got to go out and say, look, we want this, we want to provide it for all students. It's not just at one spot. We want to make it an equity situation for the district, and market it that way, and make sure that, and let's never forget that, playgrounds are extensions of the classroom. At the elementary level, it's socialization. It's so vital. And from a maintenance standpoint, from me, I think you really have to look at that long-term life cycle of the engineered wood fiber as opposed to the rubber, and just how much better it is custodial-wise. That it's not getting tracked into the buildings, the rubber surfaces after a heavy rain and mud and everything like that. Well, when you're on the surface is good. I mean, even right after the rain or during the rain. So I think it's something that that a task force should be charged to look at and look at all those possibilities for funding outside of the conventional system that we have, because I think there is community support for it.
You guys have anything you want to contribute to that conversation that they would benefit from?
There's a lot, but nothing that really comes to mind. I mean, being a certified playground and safety inspector, there's benefits to whatever kind of material you choose, but there's always room for improvement. And I think we're in a good situation where we have a grounds crew that's constantly looking at improvement across grounds, and we'd be happy to do whatever the community really wants. We don't have a strong preference one way or the other, so we're kind of open to whatever.
Great. Sure. Excellent. And that's a task force for that. I think focused on the equity issue and everything like that, district and looking at it as a district-wide thing and not just a one and done. That way, that should be the big charge with that as well.
I'd like to look at it, and I hope you do too, from that policy level. And I think if we can get what Kingsley's plan is to really try to simulate that feedback into what that policy should eventually look like and feel like, and then that helps all of us do our jobs better when we know what the expectations are and how we need to move forward. So I think we've got the framework working as you desire, and just have to give it some time to work through.
Craig, with the interest savings that we're experiencing right now, since we're getting such good rates and selling ahead, is there any extra funds that could be utilized in the new playgrounds that we're putting in that could be put towards those? For example, the Lincoln budget, increased by $3 million, and a playground surface is what, $100,000. So, I'm just wondering if there's room there with, some savings. If we can put $3 million in with our savings, surely we could find $100,000.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great point, Lori. And Dwayne and I have had some preliminary discussions on that, and Grant is still in that formation stage where we haven't really got everything nailed down yet. But the last we looked at it, it's coming in a little bit under budget. And so could there be a little bit more in the way of resources put towards that? That's a very distinct possibility. So I think we have to be really open-minded to that. And hopefully, as we work through these policy decisions, that'll really help clarify that on every time that we go to build or renovate or those kind of things, we'll have that structure on which to fall back on, and we can communicate to our parents and how all that works, so, yeah.
And also from a municipality standpoint,
Mm-hmm.
looking at, we get 28 agreements to expand gymnasiums and things like that.
Yeah.
Our playgrounds are utilized by everyone.
That's a good point.
And if we look at it and we say, especially in Grant, if we go to North Liberty and we say, hey, this is a benefit to your community, would you partner with us and make sure that we have an all-weather surface for the kids that go to school and the kids that just come to visit their relatives on the weekend, and get that benefit to the community? That's something we can look at as well.
I think Craig, you're right. The policy's going to drive that, and that's really what I'm kind of wanting to get at through this conversation, right? Is I know that we're not going to have all-inclusive playgrounds in our district in another year and a half before my term on the board, ends, right?
But policy lives on.
Policy will help drive that, and I want to make sure we're doing that. And I think the task force is a good way to start it, but I think that finance piece has to be part of that then. If you're going to say, here's our recommendation is that we want this type of playground, this type of surface, and we want it everywhere, fine. I mean, I don't think anybody here would tell you, no, why would we want inclusive playground? Of course they want it, but then it's got to be, all right, well, how are we going to look at making it happen? And I think we do need to look at it. People need to know what can you do and can't you do. Can we go out and fundraise, and can we have this fund this is the ICCSD playground fund that people are donating to from God knows where, and we're going to gobble that up readily and use that.
Sure.
I think we do have, I'm told all the time that if you just ask people, they'll give us money to do this kind of stuff. I'd like to prove that to be true, but I want to make sure that we're doing that.
We've got a poster outside the room that proves that, when we say this is a priority, we want to make it happen, and we go to the community responds, so.
Well, just one final comment on the resource side of things. Raising our property taxes 98 cents this year is probably not a good time to talk about increasing the tax rate. But there will be an opportunity for you to have this discussion down the road. Pearl is an available levy. It's 13.5 cents, that's all it is, and it would raise $750,000 for you as a school district to put specifically towards after-school programming and your playgrounds. That's what it's designed to do. And so somewhere down the road, some board is going to need to discuss that. And maybe the committee will explore that option and come back with a recommendation that in a few years that the board take that up as a consideration. And so I just plant that as a possibility as well.
Yeah, so I guess, we kind of talked short-term and long-term. I think
Right.
long-term is really what we need to drive at, right? I think that now is the time for the task force to figure out stuff and then figure out how to craft policy from that, not necessarily spending millions of dollars this year. But there are some of the short-term things, as Lori mentioned, as we look at Grant, if we're saving money. I mean, I'm going to be looking at,
Right.
I think when we first talked about acceleration, I think Paul asked, all right, if we're accelerating this and saving money here, can we look at adding more to the playground there? Like, that's the kind of stuff that I think we'll want to be looking at in the short term. If, this is going to help one place, can we, do something with it in the short term? But I do think that, personally for me, I would like to see a much bigger umbrella-looking policy as to how we want our playgrounds to look. Not today, not tomorrow, but 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and going on. And stuff will change over time. We could say, all right, we're going to put in the best rubber surface now, and then next thing you know, it's all pressurized air and everybody's on a giant trampoline or something. Who knows?
Right.
But some of our playgrounds and their surfaces need a lot of work, and some are not so bad. But we need to I want to get to a better place, and I don't think I'm stretching too far for speaking for other board members to say we want to get to a better place, but I think we need to be, much like when we talked about safety and security, I think we need to be very specific about where we want to get to, and then figure out how to get there. And know that it's not a short process, but it needs to be a process, and we need to figure it out. I don't have a lot of other topics. I would love to get that. If Kingsley's working on a task force, I think that's a great place to start, but I know Kingsley seems like he's been stretched pretty thin with a lot of different things, so I'd like to make sure that if he needs some support from the board to really get that going, I'd like to give it to him, but I don't know what that would entail, but I want to make sure that it's not the kind of thing that drags on and we haven't created it yet and nobody's had a meeting yet and that kind of stuff, so I'd like to make sure that it happens
Is it
sooner
the
than
type
later.
of a thing that Kingsley could, sorry, excuse me for not.
No, go ahead.
Is Kingsley to the point where if we give him the charge, this is, we can go forward with this, or are we still a ways away from that?
I think he's kind of already going forward with
It
it.
sounds like he already, yeah. he's doing it.
He's already
We
moving forward.
gave him that charge.
You gave him that charge already.
Yeah.
So he's moving forward with it. Yeah, he's just put some more meat framework behind it here lately, and I think he's got it pretty well settled on his mind as to how he wants to attack it, so.
Do you think he's not here to speak for himself. Can we ask him if he can, at the next board meeting, if we're going to talk about our operations meeting or next board meeting, can he at least tell us where we're at with that task force at the next meeting, you think?
I would think so.
That would be good.
And also, I submitted some DOJ questions, and I'd like to get a response to those that were submitted, I think a month ago, or recently.
I'm encouraged by this whole process and the fact that, if you remember, just 2 years ago, we didn't have a program that was even, that the district was even working at improving our playgrounds. It was completely in our parents' hands, and it was whether those parents were able to raise money or not raise money. And so we've come a long ways in this journey, and I just want to make sure that your context and your mindset, you know that we've started with virtually nothing, and we've really moved the bar down the road a long, long way. And it's nice to be having a discussion about surfacing and all those kind of things, but I'm really happy that we're actually working on the equipment itself and working with parents and the stakeholders in those buildings to improve that process as well. So.
Yeah, I know we've taken little steps, and that's what's going to take is a whole lot of little steps to get there, right? I guess maybe it's a big step too. I don't want to belittle it, but I know very acutely of what happens when a PTO goes crazy and buys equipment and then there's no support to it, right? My wife and I actually were the lone dissenters at a Van Allen PTO meeting way back in the day when my kids were at Van Allen. They wanted to spend all of the PTO's money to put smart boards in every classroom. And we didn't think that was the right thing to do with all of our money. My wife and I were like, oh, let's do a couple. And there was a lot of people brought in to vote yes on that. That's how that played out. And they spent all the PTO's money. Not only did it kind of kill the PTO, it also had a bunch of smart boards that sat in boxes not being installed for a very long time because that part wasn't thought about. And then as those smart boards got old, because they were all bought on the same day, they all started falling apart at the same time. So I know very acutely of why you need to think the long term on that stuff. But I think we've been, in a lot of cases, not just playgrounds, but a lot of things, I feel that we've been pretty reactive, and I really like the fact that I think this discussion and a lot of other discussions that we've had, we're trying to be proactive to really get all these bases covered, but doing that can sometimes make it a very long process. And that's what I'm afraid is, let's really hash it out and really feel comfortable with everything, and next thing we know, 4 years have gone by and we haven't figured anything out. So I want to drive it forward, but not miss anything. So that's kind of my goal on this particularly. So that's why I would prod a little bit. If we're going to have a task force, that's great, but I want to get it going and see what some of those next steps are. You guys have any last minute things on that?
The only thing I'd add is just as you think about grant, what is the time frame that you would need to look at if that surface were going to be changed?
Here pretty soon.
Yeah.
Um,
Come to appendix 9.
Yeah, we've already sent, the day after the city council approved it, we sent the plans out for the contractors to start looking at them, okay? But we don't have all of the details about the playground equipment and that kind of thing settled at this point in time. And so, but that's kind of the next step in the process as we go through that. So, yeah, here pretty soon, we'll have to start making decisions.
So it sounds like it's probably not possible time-wise for the policy to be built prior to
We
the
might not have policy, but I
playground
think
decision.
We might have to make a
some
decision.
kind of direction as to where we
Yeah.
want to go with it. I mean, I think,
Well, but we haven't missed the window to tell North Liberty to pull me up.
No, we haven't. You can always ask.
Yes.
They wanted us to pay for the crossing guard the other night, didn't they? Yeah, and we said no. So I'm not sure
Well,
that's
It
going to be.
doesn't cost us anything to.
Yeah.
Nope.
I know where everybody lives. North Liberty. I'll go knock on some doors.
Knock yourself out.
That's right.
So is this something that the operations committee wants to keep on their agenda for just this
Sure.
school in particular? Because it's not gonna, it's gonna be done before the policy is formulated by the committee and voted on by the board.
I guess I'm not clear what it is.
Well,
Do we want to just
do we
make a
want to
decision?
kind of keep revisiting this as it goes forward to get an idea, to make sure that, you know, if there's opportunities that.
To catch grant.
To catch grant before it gets past us.
Do we, the operations committee, want to? Is that what you're asking? Like,
I don't know.
We don't meet all that frequently. I'm going to guess that
That's-
Grant's going to get through the process before we likely can meet again.
So maybe is that a
So-
decision you need from the board, that not our committee? I mean, we would make a
Well, I don't think there's
recommendation
any-
one way or the other, but.
Playground design as of yet then, right? So if we wanted to have some sort of input on it as a board, I mean, we'd have to know dollars too, right? We can't just say, okay, yep, this one, build it, awesome, without, we need to know money, but basically, probably the next step in Appendix 9 on Grand, we're going to do it.
My recommendation would be for you to wait until you get the bids back so you know what dollars you're working with, okay?
I think that's
For grant, and that's next month. And we're not going to get the playground designed and built and too far down the road for your input by that time anyway. Right, Sam?
Correct.
Okay.
It would be
Probably next January.
correct.
So
So we would
we
have to
have
January.
lots of time.
Oh, I think the
So-
This is a
committee-
2-year build, remember,
Right,
on grant?
Yeah.
I think we
There's,
could
there's
keep that.
there's time to revisit it as we go forward. So-
You probably will have a policy decision. In fact, I expect Kingsley's timeline to be much more compressed than that, so.
I think that's great. If we have till January, yeah, I think,
Yeah.
I agree, we can do that. So, forget what I said.
Well, if we're kind of done on that, I mean, we're going to do some agenda setting, I think we can move into that. Do we want to have more playground discussion at the next meeting, or do we want to kind of start off a couple new
Well, we could
topics?
just have an update.
Just,
The board's going to get an update.
Jeff just reminded me that Longfellow, we did specify rubber as the ad alternate. So we're actually getting a price on it as they're bidding that back to us.
Oh,
Great.
Nice.
So that'll come
So
back to the
you'll
board.
have a chance to reflect on that when those bids come back to
That'll
us.
come back through the appendix 9 process.
And remind me, is Longfellow Save money?
Yes,
Okay,
it is,
so,
yeah.
So maybe,
Well, my thought of just revisiting it is that we could, by the next one, this task force should be meeting and we might have some
Right.
information there that we could get an idea of just
So a quick
some things.
playground
It's-
update.
Just, yeah,
where we're at.
just as a parking lot thing, you know.
I'd like to try and keep it to 2 topics, because obviously we can't get 2 topics
These are
done in
big
a amount
ones,
of
huh?
time. It is.
Real big.
So some of the things we brought up, and they were in the minutes and my scribbled little notes, was the IPM task force, well, IPM group, whatever it was called now, is it still a task force? But just kind of where we're at with IPM in general.
I don't know that the committee, was the committee maintained or the committee was disbanded? And we had a policy, but we didn't go any further than that.
The committee's still in place, the smart work group session is still working through some of the details, and we're actually discussing what and when we bring back to the larger committee.
Really?
Beyond that, you'd have to talk to Dave.
I thought I was on one of those. I haven't been getting in.
So that
No,
one,
no,
that's,
so this was the smaller group is still.
Right, no, I thought I was on
subgroup.
one of the smaller groups too.
And so the information for the big group has not gone back out yet, so but
Okay.
it should be soon.
so that was one of the potential topics.
Right. Would there be anything in our next operations meeting before spring cranks too far out to report back to us, or?
Dave McKenzie can always give you an update on
Sure.
where we're at, what we're
We could just
doing.
have.
I guess maybe we should look at a date for a meeting, because when we had talked about it, right, we were going to do after the second board meeting of the month on the quarter, and that clearly didn't work. So this meeting is about 8 weeks past when it was supposed to happen, so we did talk that quarterly is kind of an appropriate time for operations to meet. I don't know, do we want to just jump to 3 months from now, or do we want to try and get back to being on a quarter? I guess I would take.
Let's see, you want to have it done before June, so you can stay within the second quarter?
And then,
Be my recommendation.
Again, when school starts. You don't
Yeah.
have to meet over the summer.
I mean,
Most committees don't.
I was perfectly fine with doing it the first Tuesday of the month, but I know that that's when P&G was meeting, and I didn't want to
We stack them.
cross any problems. If this 4:30 to 6 time works, because I know P&G was going to meet after this, and then
Right.
that got bumped. But if that works for everyone, that would actually work really well for my schedule.
Work for me as well.
So if we can
I
do the
think-
first Tuesday, so
who's the other
maybe.
one on here, Janet?
Janet?
Yes.
I think it worked for her, except she was out of town.
She was out of town this
Other
week,
than
yeah.
that, the 4:30 to 6 worked for her too.
Okay,
Let's
so
just keep it with that.
3 months, do we want to just do it in the first one in June? Or do we want to do it in May?
Which
May
would
not
be,
have one in June, I don't know.
May might be better. If that-
May would be the 1st, little May Day action there. And June is the 5th.
um,
I'm open.
May 1st, sound good to
I'll
at
make
least
time.
put on the calendar? We got bumped like 12 times already with this meeting, so at least we'll get the date.
If you start with May 1st, you can
Right.
always go to June 5th.
We'll start with May 1st, 4:30. All right, so we got that. So, May 1st, will we have IPM stuff to talk about by then?
Yeah.
I guess was the question, now that we have a date. I don't know.
Move to adjourn.
Well,
Are you saying?
well, are we gonna, is that something, is that what we want to put on there? Is IPM stuff? Some of the other stuff, operational efficiencies, and I think it's a big thing I think we're tackling when we're looking at some of the big picture boundaries and other things like that. I think operational efficiencies comes into play there if we're gonna start the talk of sister schools or magnets or whatever other things. That's kind of something that as a whole we're looking at doing. I don't know if we want to kind of at
You
least.
talking about closing buildings?
No.
Oh.
Not yet, anyway. That would be something I'd be interested in, at least starting that conversation, because I think it's continuing on what we as the full board are
I think we should
discussing.
adjourn.
We'll talk about it. You guys are
I don't
not
want to
being
speak for
helpful.
Janet.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job.
That's what Janet wanted to add, so maybe send an email.
Well,
and
yeah,
ask
we
if
can,
there's anything.
and some of that stuff,
Yes.
I mean, we've got time to add things
Lots of
to it
time.
and that.
You may
so-
have things that come out of the blue.
Exactly.
So let's put those two on there, along with just
Right.
the
IPM and
playground
playground?
update and
Okay.
IPM and operational efficiencies, and they'll be our placeholders, and as we move
Exactly.
closer to May, we'll figure it out.
Exactly.
All right,
Bueno.
I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Sean.